Good evening. Thank you all for coming here this evening, and thank you for your support of the dignity of human life. I also want to thank you for the privilege of addressing you this evening. In this address, I wish to highlight the pro-life teaching of Pope Francis in his recent encyclical Laudato Si. Though this encyclical is dedicated primarily to the environment, there are several sections of this encyclical that have a very rich and important pro-life teaching. First, I will explore the roots of this teaching where the Holy Father addresses and corrects an erroneous understanding of the human person. In this context, I will also illustrate the connection between the teaching of Pope Francis and the teaching of Saint John Paul II. Finally, I will examine the respect for the dignity of human life as a central element of our care for the environment. In other words, one cannot truly care for the environment unless one truly cares for and respects the dignity of human life. As a prologue to our reflections, I wish to clarify a false understanding. Some seem to believe that Pope Francis has not been upholding the teaching of the dignity of human life. This is false. For example, a quick search of the Vatican website on abortion yielded 20 hits in which abortion was addressed by the Holy Father. It is true that Pope Francis does not address abortion and other related matters as frequently as his predecessors, yet he has not been silent. Over and over again, I see that the media tend to be selective in what they report about the Holy Father. Pope Francis believes that the teaching of the Church in regard to abortion is clear, and indeed it has been clear and unwavering throughout the history of the Catholic Church. In addition, even a recent article by the Associated Press acknowledged that Pope Francis is not in any way changing the Church's teaching on abortion. I quote, "Francis has upheld church teaching opposing abortion and echoed his predecessors in saying human life is sacred and must be defended." End of quote. So now let us turn to the first part of our reflection. Pope Francis addresses and corrects an erroneous understanding of the human person. Now, this error of an understanding of the human person is evident in the common mantras of proponents of abortion. For example, we might hear them say, "It's my body and I have the right to do with my body what I want." Or, in reference to the unborn child, "It's just tissue." Pope Francis strikes to the root of these errors in his encyclical Laudato Si. And there are two fundamental errors here: who the human person is, and second, the relation of the human person to the world or the environment. And so first, let us examine the erroneous understanding of the nature of the human person. Now, I'm going to use Father Sebastian here as my guinea pig. He didn't know this. Father Sebastian, that's a nice sport coat you have. Would you be happy if I took the scissors and cut off the sleeve of your sport coat? No, you wouldn't be happy if I did that. Good answer. Would you be happy if instead I cut off your arm?
Oh, no.
Is there a difference between cutting off the sleeve of your sport coat and cutting off the sleeve of your arm? Yes, there is a difference. Now please excuse this rather graphic example, but the point I'm trying to make here is that the human body is not a thing that we own. like a piece of clothing. The human body is not a tool that we can use for whatever purpose we desire. The body is an integral part of the human person. Or in other words, we might say that we are body persons. What we do to the body, we do to the person. Thus, the human body is not something to be merely manipulated at will. It must be treated in a way that gives due reverence to the dignity of the human person. In this light, Pope Francis critiques this error in which man claims absolute power over the human body. And I quote from Pope Francis: "Human ecology also implies another profound reality, the relationship between human life and the moral law, which is inscribed in our nature and is necessary for the creation of a more dignified environment. Pope Benedict XVI spoke of an ecology of man, based on the fact that man too has a nature that he must respect and that he cannot manipulate at will. It is enough to recognize that our body itself establishes us in a direct relationship with the environment and with other human beings. The acceptance of our bodies as God's gift is vital for welcoming and accepting the entire world as a gift from the Father and our common home. Whereas thinking that we enjoy absolute power over our bodies turns often subtly into thinking that we enjoy absolute power over creation. Learning to accept our body, to care for it, and to respect its fullest meaning is an essential element of any genuine human ecology. Also, valuing one's own body in its femininity or masculinity is necessary if I am going to be able to recognize myself in an encounter with someone who is different. In this way, we can joyfully accept the specific gifts of another man or woman, the work of God, the Creator, and find mutual enrichment. It is not a healthy attitude which would seek to cancel out sexual difference because it no longer knows how to confront it." End of quote. Note that the Holy Father calls us to accept our body and to respect its fullest meaning. We must recognize the truth that our body is integrally a part of who we are. We do not have absolute power over the human body, and therefore we do not have absolute power over human life. We must therefore respect our bodily life and the bodily life of others. We must accept the nature of our body for what it is. We must accept sexual difference and all that that difference entails. We must accept that our body has a nature and must be respected. In other words, unborn human beings are not just tissue. And we simply cannot do what we want with our body in disregard to our body's intrinsic meaning and our body's intrinsic dignity. The second error in the common mantras that promote abortion sees nature as something that can be manipulated at will. Pope Francis calls this mindset the technological paradigm. And I quote from our Holy Father: "The basic problem goes even deeper. It is the way that humanity has taken up technology and its development according to an undifferentiated and one-dimensional paradigm. This paradigm exalts the concept of a subject who, using logical and rational procedures, progressively approaches and gains control over an external object. The subject makes every effort to establish the scientific and experimental method, which in itself is already a technique of possession, mastery, and transformation. It is as if the subject were to find itself in the presence of something formless, completely open to manipulation. Men and women have constantly intervened in nature, but for a long time, this has meant being in tune with and respecting the possibilities offered by things themselves. It was a matter of receiving what nature offered, and as if from its own hand. Now, by contrast, we are the ones to lay our hands on things, attempting to extract everything possible from them, while frequently ignoring or forgetting the reality in front of us. Human beings and material objects no longer extend a friendly hand to one another. The relationship has become confrontational. End of quote. The error of the technological paradigm that Pope Francis speaks about can be summed up in this way. First of all, technology in itself is not bad. Rather, the Pope is criticizing a distorted interior attitude that leads us to employ technology in a destructive way instead of a constructive way. We use technology to destroy human life and destroy the environment. Instead of being in tune with and respecting the possibilities offered by things themselves or receiving what nature has allowed, we are the ones to lay our hands on things, attempting to extract from them everything possible while frequently ignoring or forgetting the reality in front of us. And allow me to provide some examples of the technological paradigm at work. The technological paradigm that the Pope talks about is an underlying attitude in the practices of Planned Parenthood that have recently come to light. It is this attitude, this paradigm, that views the human being, the unborn human being, as merely a source of materials, of organs, tissues, and body parts that can be obtained, harvested, and used at will. It is this attitude, this technological paradigm, that does not respect the intrinsic value of the things in themselves and of human life in itself. Rather views life as just another thing that can be controlled, manipulated, and dominated. Another example of this technological paradigm at work is in vitro fertilization, or test tube babies. For example, in the way in vitro fertilization is usually performed, several ova are fertilized. As they develop, they are graded according to their quality. Those human embryos of lesser quality are destroyed or discarded, while those of a good quality are implanted in the woman's womb. And leftover human embryos are often frozen or used for research purposes. And it's estimated that there are over 500,000 frozen embryos in the United States. Now we might ask ourselves, is it in accord with the dignity of the human person, the dignity of human life, to grade the quality of human beings and discard those who do not make the grade? Is it right to freeze human beings so that we can use them later on? At play in test tube babies, so to speak, is the technological paradigm that Pope Francis talks about, that treats human life as if it had no intrinsic worth, as if it were a thing to be manipulated and produced or manufactured. I wish to make clear that a child conceived by in vitro fertilization does have incredible and intrinsic dignity. The problem is not with the child conceived, rather it is the method. The method of in vitro fertilization does not respect the dignity of the human person and is evidence of the technological paradigm that Pope Francis criticizes. Though he does not use the term technological paradigm, St. John Paul II also speaks of this very same problem in his pro-life encyclical Evangelium Vitae, or the Gospel of Life. Both pontiffs see the technological paradigm as a threat to the dignity of human life. St. John Paul II stated, and I quote, "Thus, in relation to life at birth or at death, man is no longer capable of posing the question of the truest meaning of his own existence, nor can he assimilate with genuine freedom these crucial moments of his own history. He is concerned only with doing and using all kinds of technology. He busies himself with programming, controlling, and dominating birth and death. Birth and death, instead of being primary experiences demanding to be lived, become things merely to be possessed or rejected. Moreover, once all reference to God has been removed, it is not surprising that the meaning of everything else becomes profoundly distorted. Nature itself, from being mother, is now reduced to being matter and is subjected to every kind of manipulation. This is the direction in which a certain technical and scientific way of thinking, prevalent in present-day culture, appears to be leading, when it rejects the very idea that there is a truth of creation which must be acknowledged, or a plan of God for life which must be respected. In contrast to the technological paradigm, we are called to have an attitude of reverence and respect for what is. We are called to respect God's plan in creation. In our attitudes and in our actions, we must respect the dignity of human life and the world that God has given us. At this point, we have explored the two fundamental errors in the mantras of the abortion proponents. They view the human body as a thing to be used, not as an integral part of the person. And building upon this error, the technological paradigm thus views the human body and the natural world as things to be exploited without regard for their intrinsic meaning, without regard for God's plan of creation. By exposing the error of the technological paradigm, Pope Francis thus makes manifest the link between the culture of death and the environmental crisis. The failure to respect the dignity of human life and the failure to respect the environment are both rooted in the same mindset, the technological paradigm. In this light, the Holy Father makes it clear that one cannot advance protection of the environment without respect for the dignity of human life. And I quote Pope Francis, Neglecting to monitor the harm done to nature and the environmental impact of our decisions is only the most striking sign of a disregard for the message contained in the structures of nature itself. When we fail to acknowledge as a part of reality the worth of a poor person, a human embryo, a person with disabilities, to offer just a few examples, it becomes difficult to hear the cry of nature itself. Everything is connected. Once the human being declares independence from reality and behaves with absolute dominion, the very foundations of our life begin to crumble. For instead of carrying out his role as a cooperator with God in the work of creation, man sets himself up in place of God and thus ends up provoking a rebellion on the part of nature. And the Holy Father continues, since everything is interrelated, concern for the protection of nature is also incompatible with the justification of abortion. How can we generally teach the importance of concern for other vulnerable beings, however troublesome or inconvenient they may be, if we fail to protect the human embryo when its presence is uncomfortable and creates difficulties? If personal and social sensitivity towards the acceptance of the new life is lost, then the other forms of acceptance that are valuable for society also wither away. Finally, Pope Francis says, on the other hand, it is troubling when some ecological movements defend the integrity of the environment, rightly demanding that certain limits be imposed on scientific research. They sometimes fail to apply those same principles to human life. There is a tendency to justify transgressing all boundaries when experimentation is carried out on living human embryos. We forget that the inalienable worth of a human being transcends his or her degree of development. In the same way, when technology disregards the great ethical principles, it ends up considering any practice whatsoever as licit. As we have seen in this chapter, a technology severed from ethics will not easily be able to limit its own power. In conclusion, our own pro-life efforts must get at the roots of our problems in society if we are going to be able to foster the dignity and respect and care for human life. Human life is not disposable. It is not something to be used and thrown away. We must pray for a conversion of mind and heart that once again views and respects the material world that God has created, and the most important part of that material world is the creation of human bodily life, which is sacred and must be treasured. In the creation narrative in Genesis, God looked upon what he created and saw it as good. May we too have this attitude. And let us start with our own lives, our own bodies. Do we see our own bodies as good? Or are we unhappy with them? And if we do not treasure our own body, our own bodily life, how can we truly begin to respect the bodies and lives of others? The pro-life teaching of Pope Francis in his encyclical Laudato Si might be summed up in this way. One cannot advance protection of the environment unless one also respects and cares for the dignity of human life. Human life has incomparable dignity. It is sacred. We must seek a conversion from the technological paradigm, conversion from the paradigm of use and abuse, to a paradigm of reverence, respect, and love. This interior conversion is necessary to uphold the dignity of human life, to respect our environment, and to reverence God's plan for creation. Thank you.